You know the scene? You're flipping through channels, and suddenly, there it is, this incredibly calm, comforting world. You've got a man with a gentle voice, that iconic cloud of hair, and a canvas where nothing can ever go wrong, because there are no mistakes, just happy little trees. But the peaceful world Bob Ross painted for us was actually born from a place you would never ever expect.
That right there, that was his whole philosophy, wasn't it? It was this beautiful, gentle idea that invited millions of us to just try, to pick up a brush without being afraid. It was a promise that, everything's going to be okay, that any little flaw is actually a new opportunity. But the man who shared these words with us, well, he lived a totally different life before he ever stood in front of a TV camera.
And this is the central puzzle of Bob Ross. How does a man whose entire job was to scream at people become the man whose whisper calmed the whole world? It's almost impossible to believe, but the soothing painter we all know and love, he had this whole other life as a disciplinary master sergeant in the U.S. Air Force. So let's get into how that incredible transformation happened.
Okay, so to really understand the painter, we first have to get to know the soldier. This is a story of two completely opposite people, somehow living inside the same man.
So let's rewind a bit. He was born in Florida back in '42, and he was one of those kids who just loved being outside, always taking care of animals. He even dropped out of school to become a carpenter with his dad. But then, at 18, he makes a choice that would totally change the course of his life for the next 2 decades. He joins the Air Force.
And look, his military career, this wasn't just a quick detour or a short little chapter. This was a long, demanding, and really tough part of his life that would ultimately shape the man who later craved nothing but peace and quiet.
20 years. Just let that sink in for a second. That's how long Bob Ross was in the military. And he didn't just serve his time, he rose all the way up the ranks to become a master sergeant. For 2 decades, this wasn't some side story, it was his entire adult life.
And get this, he was stationed way up in Alaska. You can just picture the snowy mountains and big pine trees that would later fill up all his canvases. But his job there had nothing to do with beauty. As a first sergeant, he was the guy in charge of discipline. He was the enforcer. He had to be the tough guy.
And you don't have to take my word for it. He said it best himself. This role, it forced him to be a mean, tough person. And you can just hear in his voice that he grew to absolutely hate it. I mean, he was living a life that just went against everything he was, and it was completely grinding him down.
So this brings us to the big turning point. He was just done with all the shouting. And in painting, he found his escape. And he made a promise that would change absolutely everything. While he was up there in Alaska, he stumbled upon this old painting technique from the 16th century called alla prima, which literally means at first attempt. We know it as wet on wet. And this was the key. It was a complete game changer because it allowed him to paint a full, beautiful landscape in like under 30 minutes, which is perfect for a guy who only has a little bit of time on his lunch break.
And just like that, the path forward just clicked into place. Look, he hated his job, he found this amazing technique that made painting super fast and actually profitable, and pretty soon he was making more money selling his art than he was from his Air Force salary. So in 1981, after 20 long years, he retired and he made a solemn promise to himself he was never, ever going to scream again.
So with that promise made, he started to consciously build this whole new person, the one we all recognize today. And he became this huge icon through a few smart choices and, of course, a couple of very happy accidents.
Which, of course, brings us to the look. I mean, we have to talk about that hair. That perfect halo of curls is just as famous as his happy trees. So was it all part of some carefully crafted brand from the very beginning?
Nope, not even close. It was a classic 100% pure Bob Ross happy accident. He was just starting out, trying to save a little money, so he got a perm so he wouldn't have to pay for haircuts. He apparently hated it, but by the time he thought about changing it, his face and that hair was already part of his company's logo. He was stuck with it. And you know what? It made him unforgettable.
Would you really break it down? His entire philosophy on the show was just a complete rebellion against his past life. Think about it. In the military, it was all about strict discipline and getting punished for mistakes. But on his canvas, there were no mistakes, only opportunities to create something new. He traded a world of rigid, suffocating rules for one of absolute, total creative freedom.
So when The Joy of Painting finally hit the airwaves in 1983, it was an instant hit. But here's a little detail that might blow your mind. Bob Ross was never paid a dime by PBS for hosting the show, not 1 cent. The show is basically a giant half-hour commercial for his company, Bob Ross Inc., which sold all the art supplies and the painting classes. The gentle artist was also a very, very savvy businessman.
Now, even all these years after he passed away, his presence hasn't faded at all. In fact, you could argue it's stronger than ever. He's reaching a whole new generation in a way that I don't think anybody could have seen coming.
So what is it? Why does he resonate so deeply today? In our crazy, high-anxiety, always online world, what is it about this quiet painter from the 80s that has turned him into a global icon for millennials and Gen Z?
After losing his wife Jane in 1992, Ross was diagnosed with lymphoma himself, and he passed away in 1995. He was only 52. And his story really could have ended there. But then, in 2015, something totally unexpected happened. The gaming platform Twitch, of all places, aired a marathon of his old show, and millions of young viewers discovered him for the very first time.
And they didn't just see a painter. They heard something else. You know, that soft, rhythmic scraping of the palette knife, the gentle tap-tap-tapping of the brush, and of course, that hypnotic, soothing voice. He basically became an unintentional pioneer of ASMR. He provides this incredible, therapeutic calm for a really anxious digital age. He's not just teaching art anymore. He's a tool for mental wellness.
So in the end, the story of Bob Ross is really the story of a transformation. He was a man who was required to be loud, who had to be mean, and who made a conscious choice to spend the rest of his life doing the exact opposite. He took all the noise and all the screaming he was forced to create, and he deliberately turned it into the whisper that continues to bring joy and peace to millions of people around the world.